Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Owls.
Owl who?
Damn, you messed it up.
I messed it up?
Mm-hmm.
How did I
You're
mess
supposed
it
to say
up?
owls who.
I said owls.
Let's try it again. Knock, knock.
I'm not answering the door. There's too many birds at my door. Okay, who's there?
Owls.
Owls who?
Exactly.
I think this went well.
Wow, this is
Wow, yeah, this is perfect.
Welcome to Mistakes Were Made, a podcast about non-monogamy for messy people like us. I'm Sarah. I'm a queer, non-monogamous therapist, parent, and writer.
And I'm her husband, Alex. I'm currently taking some time away from work to focus on my family.
Wow. There's your joke. There's your cold open.
It's true, but I've always wanted to say that, you know.
I'm Jessica here producing, resident monogamist on the podcast.
And today, we got a special guest, Alex.
Yeah, Ramsey, thank you for coming to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm the resident black person here today.
Thank you, Ramsey.
Thank you.
Ramsey and I met a few months ago at a party where we discovered our mutual enthusiasm for the game Taboo, which we were on the same team, right?
We were, and we dominated the other team.
Did we? I think we lost in the end. I think we were way ahead.
It's because they switched people halfway.
Yeah.
But we were very much like... We had a great start.
We were like the Packers in the 2014 NFC Championship.
I thought you guys weren't talking about
Yeah, I thought there were two games that we wouldn't be talking about.
Sorry, I had to go there. Yeah, it was we were really holding it down, like getting so many, six answer 7. I don't know if you guys have played Taboo, but this is our new corporate sponsor.
You know what? I did play Taboo recently at the 3rd grade reading night at my kid's school. So,
Speaking of juvenile, yeah, and then we talked more, and I found out that you're the moderator of a local polyamory online forum group. And you have lots of insightful things to say about lots of insightful things. So we wanted to have you on the podcast. And maybe before we get into topics, maybe you can just tell us like a little bit about your background and your sort of like poly story. You're a polyamorous person.
I am indeed a polyamorous person. I've been poly... not for as long as I can remember. I think I just was like very monogamous and would just date a lot of people and then not necessarily want to get into a relationship because I felt like I didn't want to lose whatever connection or friendship I had with that person because, everybody wants you to like cut off anybody else you had any sort of relationship with. And then somebody explained to me that like you can be poly and I still didn't think I was going to be poly, so I would date other poly people and see how they, interacted. And that was, like, fun, but it wasn't for me, like, in Olympia. And it wasn't until, like, I really did more research on my own and kind of, like, figured out how I would just, like, want to date other people and, like, have that be my own style that I kind of, like, came into being poly. So I'd say I... found out about poly in 2018 and then really started practicing in 2022. And then I've been just only dating non-monogamous people, no monogamous. Sometimes they slip in here and there, but I do my best to at least make sure that everybody's like aware of that aspect because it can run into a lot of issues if you don't let them know.
Yeah, can I ask a question about that? Because
Sure.
I feel like there's like a fuzzy definition piece of this dating monogamous versus non-monogamous people thing. I have found myself in like a handful of relationships where the person was like, yeah, I'm interested in polyamory and like I'm coming out of a long monogamous relationship and I'm dating a lot of people and I want to explore what polyamory is about.
Yeah.
But I also have found that sometimes with that group of people, the distinction between like really wanting to figure out like what polyamory is about and explore that as a possible way of like being in relationship and just like dating around until you find your next monogamous person. Yeah. It's like that line is kind of blurry.
It's very blurry and a big overlap.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people in that situation when you're single or even like in a polyamorous relationship but still kind of like dating, it's just like all in that same pool. Just because most monogamous people, when they're just dating and like seeing where things go, they're fine to date and a little bit more open to that like different relationship style. But the difference is that like if they find someone else who like meets their needs, they're just happy to jump off and like, you know, get rid of that relationship regardless of how that affects the other person.
So it's just a little bit of a gamble.
If you're dating like monogamous people, or, I mean, I guess it depends. It can be a gamble. That's, you know, usually why I try to like date people who either are non-monogamous or like aware that I'm not, you know, monogamous. Because like if they, and then I also don't put a ton of like energy into that relationship. I'll put a lot of energy in the beginning to like get it off the ground. But then like past that, I'm not going to like engage as much unless they also want that. So I'm happy to like, you know, flap my wings and then like let whatever comes up from that go. And then if anybody else wants like to float towards me, they're welcome to.
Interesting.
I didn't love the metaphor, but
I kind of did though. And especially I know that our like podcast listeners couldn't see you actually flapping your arms in a really elegant way.
Yeah. Thank you.
But it was quite elegant. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I also, in listening to you talk, I was realizing everyone who is polyamorous probably has that moment when someone told them about polyamory.
Yeah, I was curious about that too.
And you're just like, wait, what?
Who was that person? Do you remember? Was it someone you were dating or like?
No, it was like one of my friends, and I was in a relationship at the time, and she was just like, you know, you probably like would be, you know, polyamorous where people like date multiple people at a time, and I was like, yeah, I probably would, but like at that time that I was in the relationship,
that existed.
I was like, I'm, you know, in a monogamous relationship, and I think that most people, maybe it was that relationship, I was like it was a toxic one, so I was like trying to not like, you know, just get out of it. But I want to say that my friend who recommended it just thought that like that was something that I should know about. And I had dated other poly people before. But I didn't think of it as like something that I could do. And I think even like prior to that, when I had gone on dates with like other poly people, that had scared me because I very much became solo poly just out of sheer fear. Because this one person I dated, their polycule like dumped them. So
Wait, pause. What?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Like they got broken up with by like 5 different people.
Holy shit! That
All
just,
at
like,
the same time.
Yeah, so so the polycule itself was just like, we don't want to, you know, be in a relationship with you anymore. But then they also had to deal with like individual breakups because it's not just like the polycule, it's also like their relationships.
That like made my blood run cold.
Yeah, and so they also lived together. So like it was a whole thing. So
you're saying by wanting to be solo poly, you were like trying to avoid that
Very
because
much,
you wouldn't
yeah.
be in a polycule at all, basically.
I mean, yeah, I didn't want to have to watch an whole community implode like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it sounded like they were just removing them from the situation, but it was still a very painful thing to like look at.
Yeah, no kidding. And it feels kind of relevant to some of what we've been talking about on the podcast and what I bet we'll talk about today, which is like the challenges of staying in and through relationships across like rupture or, you know, different experiences, race, privilege, all of that. And like how we do it well and not so well.
It's a lot of challenge for kind of figuring out how people best like interact and are most honest. Cause I think people are the most vulnerable after a breakup and like most honest with each other during that breakup. Cause it's like, there's not much left to like hold on to. So you can kind of just be clear about like what you want and like what you're letting go of.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that there's like something particularly clear or potentially even like generative in the sense of self-knowledge at that moment. Yeah, I mean, I think, Ramsey, I might just start by saying I was really excited to have you on the podcast, in part because I feel like this is a taboo topic in polyamory, if you will. See what I did there?
I did see what you did there. That was great.
See, this is why we need the buzzer.
Okay. And I think it's really important. And I think like we, in the polyamorous community, there are some places where we're up for talking about things that are challenging and there's like a little more conflict, like couples privilege is something that I think comes up, and age is something that we've talked about, and gender. But I think when it comes to race and power and privilege around race and interracial dating, it can get real quiet real fast.
Very much so. Yeah. There's a lot of, I think both like performative activism and also it's different. It's difficult because to me, there is like that openness to listen, but not the safety to be heard, if that makes sense. So like you'll get a lot of people who are like reaching out, but it's not always like comfortable for them to like go into those spaces, or a lot of people don't have the energy or the labor, like time to just go and do all like that's needed to kind of reintegrate the BIPOC community back into things, because it's very exclusionary sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like that's why I kind of like try to be more of the bridge, because I feel like I'm always open to going out and doing things and being like in these spaces, but otherwise I don't think it will always happen as often as it should.
And that BIPOC communities experience exclusion in the poly community, and then they're like, I'm not going to do a bunch of like work and labor and show up to try and like keep this from happening again or repair what happened. What makes you interested in doing more of that?
One, because I'm not from Seattle, and I think the other thing is I haven't been I've been in the poly community for a while, but I think because I'm kind of a new-ish face, I don't have a lot of like that deep history that comes from other people in other groups that have other relationships where other things have like fallen through and they've gotten burned before.
Yeah.
So I have a little bit more of a like leniency in those interactions and more willingness to help like build the bridge, because I want to help create the safest community I can.
Yeah. When you talk about like the ruptures or exclusion, what are some of the things that are coming up a lot in the poly community?
I know like there's a group called the Pacific Northwest BIPOC Polyamory Group, and that came from another larger poly group that was just not handling like race very well. And so two other people in that group went and started their own because they just wanted like a safe space for like BIPOC people to connect who are polyamorous. And so it's a good group, and I really enjoy being in the group, but I also recognize that like it's so hard to host events and like get people to come out to things, that like when I invite people to events, like I helped out with like a speed dating event, and like two of the people in the group were also in the BIPOC group. They had asked like, when are we going to do one like for ourselves, like for other BIPOC? And I was like, you can, it's just unlikely you'd get enough people to show up, because a lot of times this one's like mainly for community, and most of the people in those groups are already pretty like saturated, and they'll just meet people to help like engage. But it's not, I would say if you invite people to something, you're going to get maybe 40% of the amount total showing up.
Yeah, that's actually seems like a pretty good percent.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm saying like I'm being pretty kind about it, I would say 20% is like more realistic, but like you have to expect a lot lower. So it's harder to plan for that.
When you say like the larger poly group was not handling race well, I'm like, I'm filling in that blank with a lot of stuff, but I'm kind of curious, like, what are the types of conflict, or like how are white people in polyamorous spaces like kind of consistently fucking up?
I don't know the one for like the exact reason why that one started. I think it was probably something with like a moderator not protecting other people as well as they should.
I see.
And because that's usually why, if it's like leadership, that's where people don't want to be a part of it, because if they feel like they can't be supported by the leadership, they don't want to be in that group. And in like the poly spaces, I think a lot of times I've seen a lot of people kind of say that like being polyamorous is a form of like can be like you can get oppressed for it. And so they're comparing it to like race in the sense that like polyamorous people can also have like a lot of oppression, and a lot of the people in like the BIPOC community were like, you can't compare, you know, that in the same way, and try to use it as like a way to commiserate with like what other people are going through.
And then let me guess, the white people didn't take that critique well.
Not usually.
Really?
Yeah, I know. So they try, you know, but it's a lot of times they are just kind of creating these issues, or like making something that's not always like the case. Like I personally try to like pick and choose my battles. I don't always like do too many things that are like problematic. I think everybody gets like a certain amount of toxicity that they can, because like it's like a vaccine, right? You have to put a little bit in to like get over it for your body.
And also, we're not going for perfect.
Right.
We're going for better. And less harm sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like one example would be like I had a meme that was, I think, like Mike Tyson and Logan Paul. And somebody asked me to change the meme because they didn't want to have Mike Tyson on there because he's like a terrible person and he's like done a lot of things to like hurt women. And I was like, sure. Normally I'd be like, fuck you, I don't care. But I get it. I think Mike Tyson he's done a lot of terrible things to women. And like, I recognize that people don't want to see that in like a polyamorous group. It was still like a white person telling me that. And I did just change the meme like with no hesitation, but it was like, there's this level where if we keep erasing things because we're like scared to face them, or like it's too painful to look at, it's hard to know why we're not supposed to look at those. And so I think like I'd be happy to just add like a edit next time and share like why he's a bad person, as opposed to just like changing it so you don't see him. Because like I think, you know, we need to know.
Yeah, and that kind of scaling piece, which is something that I've been thinking about a lot, like around staying in community and difference and conflict, where it's like, okay, everything that is activating or everything that is upsetting or everything that I have a feeling about, can I discern the difference between like a 2 and an 8 and change how I sort of engage with the community or the relationship based on that? And I think, I'll just throw this out here and see what y'all think. Sometimes it feels like we are in a period where we're learning so much so fast about the amount of harm and trauma and activation that people are living with, that we don't have any discernment. And it's just like, I have a feeling, it's uncomfortable, and I'm going to the wall with it.
Yeah.
And like, that's part of what maybe we're hoping to, I don't know, develop some nuance and sophistication around. So there's like this online space, and then there's the interpersonal space, right?
Yeah.
And like moving kind of into talking about that and interracial relationships. And I think like specifically, well, I guess I was curious with the Mike Tyson meme, was it a white woman?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think specifically sometimes white women and black men. There's a lot going on there when it comes to actually really communicating and talking about power and privilege and race.
Yeah.
And gender.
There's a lot in a lot of history between like white women and black men. I guess, you know, white people and black people in general.
Yeah.
And especially for dating like white women, I have to go into those days kind of like figuring out if like if they're interested in me because I'm black, or if they're interested just because of like who I am. And I have like, I always hated the question, you know, where people, I want to make sure that you're not a serial killer, you know, because I get that one. I used to get it a lot.
Interesting.
And I think that it's reasonable to be scared of men and like the amount of like harm that we cause. And I think it's just weird to me to like bring that up on like a first meeting, you know, and be like, I just want to make sure you're going to like murder me. And I was like, you could also murder me. Like, it's not really like as easy. But those ones, I think I've had like less people ask me that. You know, I wanted to make sure you were a serial killer. But there's been lots of times where I am less worried about like the person I'm with and more about like where I'm at. Because when I first moved to Washington, I heard in Olympia there was like a guy who got like stabbed because he was in an interracial relationship. Like a guy just came up and like stabbed him. And luckily like he survived, but it was still just like I was aware that like this is, you know, where I'm living in Washington. And Olympia's hosted like a couple of Ku Klux Klan rallies.
It's like we're very close to, you know, we're in this like ostensibly like liberal urban environment that is very close to like a very conservative rural environment, right? And like the like edges of that are kind of like a place like Olympia, I feel like is like really at the edge of that.
I mean, kind of. I think there's more people in all the spaces than we think. And I wouldn't say that they're like outside. I feel like they're pretty in the areas. They just aren't like organizing the same way as normal. But I haven't come across as much lately. I mean, not as much, but it's still very much out there.
Yeah.
And to your point, you know, talking about being in poly spaces where white people are trying to like invisibilize or flatten racial oppression, or where we're tokenizing Black partners. I mean, that's all harmful racism. And I think sometimes white Seattleites are like, well, we're not rural hot racists, and so we're not doing anything harmful, and that in and of itself creates this kind of cover for a lot of harm.
I think I would agree. I think it also feels like you have to, like, I have to remind people that there's like, you know, Black spaces and Black history. Like we had a couple of poly group events on like Juneteenth, but to them it was just like Wednesday. Right. And so like, they're like, oh, I had the day off. And I was like, yeah, because it's a holiday. And so I think kind of reminding people about those things. And it's also hard because like February to me is like, it's Black History Month. That's my favorite month. It's been hard here in Washington because there's not as many things as I'd like to do because there's a lot of Black people here, but like there's not large amount of support for those like events, but it's growing. But then when you think about poly Black people, that's
like it feels like a small subset because of the,
I don't know if it's small because it's like I meet a lot of poly Black people, but like I don't think that they know about each other. And there's a lot of people who kind of just like feel pretty isolated, and then they'll just be in like other relationships that they kind of like resign to the fact that their partner might not understand anything, and they don't feel like they can educate them about it.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Like, how has that been in your own experience, and like how much do you think about it in an individual relationship, like across race when you're dating a white person?
Usually, like for me to want to be in a relationship with a white person, I really need them to at least be aware of like the Black experience and cognizant of how it can be, like just that like they might not understand, but they should like try to ask about it. Because I had, you know, like a partner during the George Floyd like murder and then the trial, and so like I didn't want to be doing a lot during that time because it was just like a lot of stuff that comes up, and especially when there's a Black person who gets like murdered who's like around my age and like a Black male, those are like, it's harder because it's like it could have been me. And so I don't always like say that I'm like upset or feeling anything about that, but I'll feel it, and so it'll be like kind of shifting my mood. And so I would need to have like a partner who at least like understands kind of like what's going on there. But not everybody thinks about it, right? Like if you're cold, you just put on a jacket, but like what if you're not even used to wearing a jacket? And so a lot of times people don't even know like what it's like to like look for those kinds of like differences.
Yeah. It seems like really tricky though, because there is a very big space between like the kind of like, ill intent or even kind of like neglect of thinking about the issues at all, and being very aligned or like sensitively understanding what you're experiencing, right? Like I imagine most of your partners are kind of in that big space somewhere.
I mean, it's very much of I kind of have to ask them to like educate themselves, and I can give them like some resources, but like usually on the dates, if I want to be in more of a serious relationship, I need to know that they are like actively working on educating themselves and actively aware of those things.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just not very common here.
Yeah. And do you have like ways that you kind of test that out at the early part of a relationship, and they're sort of like
it's very much in my humor that I'll always be kind of testing out things. And I even do it at work. I test people's humor. Like there'll be cops coming. I'm like, oh, watch out. And then it's like,
and if they're like, they're just protecting and serving. I mean,
sometimes
I feel safer.
I feel so safe. But I mean, it really, I do my best to like make a joke to see like how they react to the joke. Like, even if they think it's funny, it's like, where are they laughing about? And like, where on that comfort level are they?
Pausing here, like one of the things that I'm noticing, Ramsey, is like how aware and vigilant you are in your relationships with white people, in spaces with white people, just like the amount of energy that's going into like using your humor to test whether or not a new connection or person that you're dating is like safe or actually cares about what your experience is as a Black man.
Yeah.
So I just like wanted to take a minute and be like, that sounds fucking tiring.
Yeah.
It is, which is usually why I like to really like be around people of color, because I don't have to do it always there. But I also feel like growing up in Wisconsin and like being raised with my mom, who very much like sheltered me, but also like gave me a lot of tools to just like be as like aware as possible and not like get so exhausted. So like these things won't exhaust me nearly as much as like other things would. And so I'm like a lot better about being efficient in those like scenarios. It's really when something like happens that is like specifically around my race or like that is really exhausting. And even then I am able to like process it. But it takes a lot of practice.
Yeah. And also like dating wasn't hard enough.
Yeah.
And being in relationships wasn't hard enough, right?
It's not, yeah.
Yeah. Well, taking a moment, I think it would be interesting to just like talk a little bit about our experiences of interracial dating and like some of the things that come up. Does that feel like a good place to go?
Sure.
Okay.
Like your experience in
everybody here.
Yeah.
And also I want to make sure that you get a chance to ask us uncomfortable questions because you say you like it.
I do like it. It's
the
fun.
questions don't have to just flow one way.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm curious, do you guys talk to your like kids about race?
Yes.
Yeah.
We do. Mm-hmm.
They go to a school that is it's actually the same school I went to growing up. It's like a little bit different now, but it is very, like it's about like 50 or 60% mostly wealthy white people. And then about 40% like working class Black people who have like more roots in this neighborhood probably. So there's a lot of, it's like very present in their classrooms, which when I was in the school, the classrooms were kind of segregated, but now they're much more integrated.
The school also has like a history connected to the Black Panther movement in the Central District. Okay. So there's like a fair amount of like history that's being taught there, which is not answering your question about whether or not we're talking to our children about race. We're like, you know what? We're letting the public schools do that because historically they've done such a good job of it, Ramsey.
Yeah.
So I think
it's also interesting that all of the principal and all the administrators pretty much are Black. Maybe not all, but all of the teachers are white.
Okay.
I don't think there's a single Black teacher in the school. So yeah, it is like hard to know when and how with young children to talk about those things and like the conundrum between like pointing out difference to them amongst their classmates, which are like honestly also kind of like class differences inside of the school, and letting them see those things themselves. I don't know how you think about that, Sarah.
Well, I think you can't raise white kids in the Central District and send them to the school that they go to and then not actively talk to your kids about race.
Right. And I guess about the context, we're talking about that, like the context a lot, and like it's Juneteenth or it's, MLK Day, here's the history of this neighborhood and the history of your school and those kinds of things. But then when it comes down to like their social dynamics inside of the school, I think that's where I get
that's where I think we fall down.
Muddled, yeah.
Okay.
Or like
I think we're better at talking about like, here's something that happened in the news. Here's a holiday that's happening. Here's like, we're doing like education around this, but like really wading into some of the more complicated, like interpersonal parts around race and friendship and like wanting to join like the Central District football team, which is a Black institution, and all of the complexities of that. I think we've got more learning to do, and we've had a couple people point that out to us recently, so not the first.
I mean, I think a good way to do it is just kind of like make learning about race like a group activity.
Oh, interesting.
And so it doesn't just have to be like reading a book. Like there's lots of movies you can watch about like the like Black experience, because it's not just like, it's a huge amount of like multimedia that you can just experience and then kind of get another perspective. But doing that as a family is helpful because it helps them know that like you're also doing it as an adult. Because a lot of times it'll feel like you're only figuring that out on your own. And then when you do like approach somebody and try to talk about race and they're also a kid, like no one's going to know what they're talking about. So just kind of like creating that balance is going to be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of, that nice white progressive tendency to like invisibilize the discomfort, what kids pick up is this is taboo and we can't touch it. We don't know how to. And, that's like, that's definitely something that I struggle with.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. All right. Good uncomfortable question.
What can I say?
What about like if we just took a minute and talked about interracial relationships that we've had or experienced? Does that sound cool? All right. So I was thinking about that in anticipation of this episode. And I was like, I have been in romantic, intimate relationships with Black men and with women and non-binary folks who are BIPOC, but not Black. And I think I was like, how much did we talk about race in those relationships? And like, how did we talk about it? And I think what I'm noticing is like a similar thing kind of to this question of how we do as a family, where as an intellectual topic, it was really common. As a political topic, yes, we talked about it. As a, how is it showing up between us? And what does that feel like? And what does that mean? Not as much. Yeah. That was like one of the reflections that I was having.
Yeah. I think for me, I was in a pretty short relationship with a mixed race woman, pretty recently. And I don't know that I think we ended up sort of to your point, like kind of instinctually talking about like our common experiences a lot more than we did about like the differences between our experiences. And then I think some of the stuff you were saying in our conversation with Reagan Jackson on the last episode, in both cases, like I noticed that I've had a fair amount of like relationships, online relationships with Black women that didn't ever like get past a certain point. And I was sort of like, I wonder why this happened. And then like the more like hearing you talk and hearing Reagan talk about like some of the tensions around dating across race, like I think there was a little bit of like clarity for me, like there's a lot of just like risk and effort that it takes. And so, there's probably a lot more reasons to bail, basically. And maybe I gave those people those reasons or whatever, or it just didn't feel like, that was the thing.
I think, so a few things I know, like both my parents are Black and like indigenous. And so I've had people think that I'm like mixed, or even ask like which one of my parents are white. Mm-hmm. And I've dated both like Black women and like mixed women. And I know that there's a lot of internalized white supremacy a lot of times, especially when they have like a white parent, because it's like there's that level where they don't feel like they're fully back in the community. I had an ex who had a like white mother and a Black father, and she had trauma with white women and Black men. So any Black men that were dating white women were an issue for her. And so like her dating me, who also dates like white women as a Black man, I'm triggering like all of her trigger. And so she wasn't like able to just like fully be okay with me just existing, because she had so much trauma around everything that I was doing. And so at least for me in interracial relationships, I know I don't always like talk about race in like the news or like the policies. I'll discuss those things, but I try to like make it just as like an everyday thing. Like I'll make a joke, right? If somebody's just like, here's this pen, it writes in Black. I was like, oh, is it because I'm Black? And so like I'll throw those things in there as a way to like create these spaces. So like I was at a friend's house and they were saying like, you know, you guys got to get out of the kitchen. Like we're just cooking. And so it was with me and like another Black person. I was like, oh, so it's colors only outside. And so like, I'll make those like jabs because it's like, you know, gauging as well as just like kind of bringing that conversation back in. Because I think if you normalize it and kind of like discuss it and kind of make it more as something that you can like, you don't have to joke about. It's hard to joke about, but it's still something that like you need to be thinking about because it's part of everything.
And it's always there.
It's always there.
You know, and that's one of the things that I was really contemplating in some of my relationships with Black men in particular. Like it was always there, and like not engaging with it is not, you know, whether together or on my own, is just like not engaging with a huge part of the relationship and the person.
When you were dating these Black men, did you ever like go out places?
We did, yeah.
And you ever go out dancing?
No, we didn't.
Okay. Like, what would you say is something where you've done where you were like around the most people?
Probably the most people was like a bar and a restaurant, Capitol Hill.
Okay.
I don't think we ever went to like a club or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what comes up. Why do you ask?
Just because it's interesting in Seattle. I don't know why. As like for me, as a like large Black man, I have so much like confusion around other Black men because like I don't know if I come across intimidating, but it's like if I'm somewhere, I have to like determine, are we like beefing, are we friends, or are we like just like recognizing each other. And so like sometimes I'll see people and it's just like nice to see another Black face, and then I'll be like at the club with somebody and I'll be like determining like what are we doing, just because of like the size and like the looks. And so if I'm there dancing with somebody, I've had times where like I have to like make sure that I'm not like coming across a lot more intimidating than needed. Because I mean, there's like even just in like looking around, because I always like to be like kind of staring, that can be considered like rude. And so when you have Black people from different areas, you don't want to like, it doesn't take much for them to feel like you're attacking them. And like in Milwaukee, people just stare at you for whatever, I called it like the Milwaukee mean mug. And so
and it wasn't a problem.
I mean, it was still a problem, but like they'll just like look at you on the bus and just like stare at you while they're driving. And that wasn't gonna like start anything, but it's just like part of how they act.
I know this isn't a great question for radio, but do you have a Milwaukee mean mug?
I think so. I think it's like
That's chilly. Okay.
Yeah, so
I feel like I just got in trouble.
Wow.
I don't do it that
The temperature
often.
just dropped.
I try to not come across that way because it obviously does that. But like it's interesting, especially the reason I asked about the club is because at the club there would be around other black men and white men. Mm-hmm. And so like I will go and like it's always interesting to see the dynamic of who's with who and how they're interacting with you. Because like there's so many times where like white people will come up to me and just like be a lot more friendly because I tend to look friendlier or I'm not as stereotypically black as someone else. I get that all the time is they say like they think of me as like I'm people's first interaction with black people generally. Like I've been their first like black boyfriend, for first black person they've talked to, first like a lot. So it's very much just like I'm used to that kind of being the introductory for people.
Wow, no pressure.
But also, I mean, what does that feel like? I mean, it seems that sounds really objectifying to me.
It is very objectifying in the sense that like I would get asked a lot of uncomfortable questions. Like I remember back in Milwaukee, I was hanging out with one of my friends and he was gay. He's just so gay. It's funny. I laugh because like he always had to refer to himself as gay and he'd be like, I'm so gay. He doesn't just drink with one straw, he uses two. And I was like, I don't know why that's important.
That is really gay.
Yeah.
No, it is.
So gay. So
Like 2 little straws?
No, 2 big straws.
Two big straws
big
is
straws.
the gayest.
Yeah. And we were at
That scans.
like a Summerfest like event and I was like trying to flirt with this girl. She wasn't interested in me. She was interested in him. And I was like, humor us for a second. And so like we were just talking and so she asked me like, why do like black men prefer like women with curves or like big butts?
Is this woman white or?
She's white.
Okay.
And then she was also asking like, why did we like, watermelon and like fried chicken? Like what was the reason behind that? And so I said like,
were you still interested in her at this point?
I was over it. I mean, she was interested in someone so gay. So like,
yeah,
that's at that point I knew her, radar was on.
That was the real problem.
But I told her that like a lot of times people are attracted to what is most familiar for them. And so like they might be interested in people who like remind them of their family or like their mother, because that's something that like is relatable. And then I said that watermelon and fried chicken are just good food and not a lot of people like those.
You
very diplomatic.
Being very generous, Ramsey.
I mean, like it's in Wisconsin and like a lot of other places, I have to pick and choose those moments, and it doesn't like I can't always be instinctively like reactionary. Like I was at a bar in Olympia and there was like this white guy who just said like the N-word, and I had to look for like another black person first, and then I was like scanning around. And then there was one, but I was like, it's not enough for me to like do anything instinctively to like react to that.
You were looking to see if it was directed at that person or to see if like...
Just to see like if I decided to do something, how much like help would I have?
Were you there with white people who are your friends or in relationship with?
No.
Okay.
But
And did any white people do anything?
No. They
Really?
were, yeah, nobody said anything. I do have one. So I was at Mod Pizza on like 85th, and I was on a date. We had just gone to see Talk to Me, and we were like in line, and this like white woman came up and like was complaining about like this houseless person who was getting like just grabbing drinks, but he was like being rude, and he was like she just called me like a bitch. And so like then one of this like the staff who was like a black man, he went and was like telling the guy to leave, and then the guy like as he was leaving called him like the N-word. And so then I was just like, here's where I'm like determining what I want to do on this like interaction. And so the black guy was just like, not today. And so he like, threw the door open and like walked and like chased the guy out. And like, had he like wanted to like beat him up, I wouldn't stop him. But like, again, like that's a lot of what people expect. And I mean, that old white guy was like scared. And a lot of people, I think, were fine, but it was still just like a lot to deal with on the date. And especially like, kind of like figuring out those.
Oh, this was you were on a date.
I was on a date.
Oh, dang.
With a white woman.
With a white woman. And this is all happening like at the Mod Pizza.
Is it an early date?
It's a first date.
Oh, shit. Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, it was.
What
did
like, she do?
She did. I mean, she was just like watching, seeing what was happening. I think, like.
Yeah. Were you worrying about her feelings?
No, I wasn't paying attention to her at that point.
Did she at any point worry about your feelings?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
But I think like she was mainly just like watching and be like, oh shit, like something's going on. And I was more just like, do I need to also go chase this old white guy out? But he was also like a staff member. So then like after I checked, I went and talked to him and like asked if he was okay. And he was like, I appreciate it. But also, I mean, like when you're, he said that like he was just tired of like people doing that. Cause like I'm sure that happens a lot more often than you'd expect. And it was just like, I just didn't want to deal with it today. So
yeah,
that was, that happened like last year. Yeah. So.
Did you and your date end up talking about it at all?
Not really. I mean, because it, like, to me, we all experienced it at the same time. And so, like, discussing that, I almost feel like, for me, if I'm going to talk about it, there has to be, like, a container for it to be held. And so, like, if I feel like there's not necessarily a container for that, I don't even want to put the energy to bring it up.
Yeah, and by container, you mean, like, that that it'll be received and safe for you to talk about it. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's why I tend to keep a lot of those like interactions and like relationships pretty surface level. Because I would rather have it be like easy and like understanding so that like I don't have to feel like I'm just like pouring into, a colander.
Yeah. Right. And just like a kind of endless resource for white people.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So you're dating, like, have you dated a black woman?
Just this one person recently that we dated for 3 months or something like that.
And she was black?
She was mixed race. Black and white.
So even mixed race people, if they're black, you still would just want to say black. Just because, like, a lot of times mixed race isn't always, like, as clear. And it could be, mixed race with anything. But also, I know, having dated a lot of, like, black women who are mixed, they really want that. Because it's, like, part of their identity. So what was that like for you?
Well, to be honest, I mean, it's interesting. I think this might speak to some of the like where sort of well-meaning white people are coming from around this. I definitely thought about it a lot in ways that are probably like could be interpreted as tokenizing. Like I was sort of like, to be honest, like kind of excited about it from that perspective, in part because I had certainly like observed in myself, like, okay, I've dated, in the 5 years that I've been poly dating, I've dated a lot of white women, and not any black women. And like, what does that mean? What is the like why there kind of? And so like going in, that was like something that made it more like compelling or interesting to me. Certainly, like I was certainly already all interested in the person for a lot of other reasons too. And in terms of like what it was like in the dynamics, I don't feel like it really affected the dynamics of the relationship all that much, or it was hard to kind of like pull that out of like all of the other things that were going on with like what was happening in her life. And like, it was an off script relationship because she approached me. And so I was more like in the position of being pursued, which was kind of new. And so, yeah, there was like a lot to kind of pull apart that made it hard for me to be like, this is, and again, also like a person with a unique individual experience that I don't know how much of it was informed by the racial dynamics in our relationship or not.
I mean, I do know Black women tend to have to pursue more than other races because it's like a lot harder for them to date. And especially here, like usually will get teased because they'll be like, you only date like white women. I'm like, it's not that I'm only dating white women. It's just like there's so many white women here. It's just like harder to find other people of color.
Yeah. I think there's also an observable, like baked in anti-Blackness in the way that like apps work and stuff like that. Like,
yeah, I would agree. I think that it's very easy to just not be interested in people based off of the race. And like, we're kind of like given this like instant like gratification of like matching. And so when you're just looking for whoever you're attracted to or like a certain type, it's easy to just like kind of ignore that as opposed to like getting to know people.
Yeah. And like a lot of them are also like stacked by, now it seems like a lot of them are stacked by like algorithmically perceived desirability. And at least for me and like what is shown to me, the Black women are deeper in that stack. Just like, in a way that seems like it's not. There's no way that it's a coincidence.
I mean, I only would think that because there's not as many Black women on this apps.
Yeah.
But it could be, I mean, I'm sure.
I think it's based on I think it's based on how people are swiping and that people are just not swiping on Black women as much. But
I mean, I know it's really hard for them to date, and also just like it's Black women have a innate like more challenging experience because there's this relationship where they have such a deep connection with Black men, but Black men don't always have that deep respect for Black women. And there is like because it's like almost from all sides that they can get like attacked.
Yeah. And there's intersectional.
And so like, it's not that people don't like when Black women date white men. They don't like when they date anyone else besides other Black men, which is hard for them because other Black men can just date whoever they want. And so then they'll get looked down upon for, not accepting like a Black man's advances when like they might just not be interested. And so that's something that I always like feel bad about, is that we don't give them like, it's hard for them. And I don't think that people are giving enough like grace in that area for like Black women, because they do a lot and they're amazing, but like it's always about the men already. And so like when people are like, we're focusing on the men, and then add more to just like, if they think about it as more for Black men too. So like, I think I just try not to like forget that they do a lot of work.
You mean just like the conversation about race in general is kind of focused on Black men rather than
on men, and then Black men is like if there's issues. So because like there's lots of things that are happening to Black women, and I feel like I've seen a lot of Black women in poly spaces, and a lot of times they're married to like a white partner. And so it'll be like at other like BIPOC events. And so then they're kind of stuck in the spot where like they can't even bring their partner to that space. And so it's harder for them to like connect with other people because they're not fully like being around everybody.
Yeah. This is making me want to like go to the one statistic that I looked up around this, because Sarah and I were talking about this episode a little bit, and she was like, oh, like also Ramsey is like, you're considerably younger than us.
Also, we like to intellectualize our discomfort. So we'll be going to a statistic now. Thank you.
No, I think it'll be a uncomfortable statistic.
Oh, great.
Which is that the like kind of I guess it's the like a survey that Match did around like how likely are you to date someone of a different race or an ethnicity, and the number like in the past, baby boomers 32% that said that they were likely to, and then Gen X 48% said they were likely to, and then millennials 61% said they were likely to, and then with Gen Z it was like back down to 57%. And like the trend line is kind of obvious or like whatever. But just how low those numbers actually are was kind of shocking to me, because like, you know, like 57% of people say hypothetically I would date someone of a different race and ethnicity. It's not like even whether they have done it or like whether they're, you know,
here's an opportunity to say the right thing without being held to it.
Right.
Like,
they have they could just virtue signal and be like, of course I would. Right. But like still, you know, 40% of people are like, no. Which, and like, what?
I think it makes sense. It's because it's like so much harder to connect when people don't understand as easily.
Right.
And so like even people who might be interested in dating interracially might not want to, because they feel like they just won't understand what the experience is like.
Right.
And I mean, like, that made me think of the OkCupid question, where it's just saying like, would you prefer to date somebody of your own race? And like, you can just answer yes. And so like,
yeah. How would you answer that question?
I said, I'm okay either way, but like, it was still something that whenever I was on somebody's profile, if I saw that one and they said yes, then I wouldn't like pursue.
Yeah. It's interesting. I guess I didn't think about in the statistic, like it's not just white people answering the question too. So there are probably a lot of people of color who are like, no thanks.
Which I mean, yeah, like why would they?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like, you have to remember it was illegal, and also like people would just kill you because you're even like thinking about being attracted to them. So,
and the timeline on that is 40 years, right? So we're, I mean, so 40 to 50 years, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. It's trying to remember when that.
Like the loving case, people who are, you know, older people who are in a mixed race couple, like they were, you know, there's people who are still alive who are like very much at the forefront of that and like facing threat of violence or legal challenges or whatever. Yeah. It's not like deep in the past. You know?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So there's like a lot of places that we can take this, and I want to ask you, Ramsey, where do you want to take it? We have like, how much time are we at? Like 20 or 30 minutes. What do you want to talk about? What have we not gotten to, or what have we gotten to and you want to talk about more?
I think maybe we can talk more about the interracial dating, just so that we can help have something so people can take away and get some tools on how to be a better partner to people that they are different from.
I love that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I like that too. I also would say, I think it's interesting to talk about how polyamory is a space where we do have opportunities to do that. And to explore different types of relationships and doing relationships differently and better. And if we aren't trying to do that when it comes to like race, then like we're missing a huge opportunity on the personal level, and I think the collective one too.
Yeah.
Does anybody have to pee before we do that though?
You could take a pee break.
Always wants to pee. Okay, so coming back, it sounded like what you were saying before the break is that we could just ask you ridiculous questions.
So yeah, I'll give you carte blanche to ask any of the uncomfortable questions. You know, you can say like, why do black people smell like that? You know, any sort
I actually
of
saw that on Alex's list of questions.
It's the lovely tea that they're drinking, probably. No, so like for somebody who's going into relationship with a black person for the first time, like a white person going into a relationship with a black person for the first time, like what advice would you give them, I guess, to kind of like avoid putting all of the work on their partner's shoulders?
I would recommend to like make sure that you're kind of educating yourself, but also being aware of the things that are happening in like the black community, and also getting a sense of like the black sense of humor. but not in like too much of a way where it's like annoying. You know,
I mean, this is why it's tricky, right?
Yeah, but like you still want to be able to participate in those jokes and just like understand so that they don't have to like explain something to you.
I feel like you gotta give us an example, Ramsey. Come on.
So like,
let's be specific.
Tom Hanks' son.
Yes,
he speaks.
Yes,
like
we were just talking
Jamaican
about this.
so well.
Yeah, that's actually where we're going.
We're going to Jamaica, and so this has been a real fucking topic.
And this whole realm was a vast oversight in the decision.
You actually go to Jamaica?
We literally are.
Nice.
And so we were talking about like Jamaican patois and the idea of like it as a language, and so
Chet Hanks.
Chet Hanks apparently speaks that language.
And I mean, like, you can't. What are you gonna say? Like, he speaks it, and you can't just take that away from him.
But Alex, we can take away from you that you do not speak it. So
But if he comes back with cornrows and like speaking, you know,
just in time for our second episode.
Exactly, just in time for the second. So, I think you want to kind of like get familiar with both the humor and also just like start talking about it, like ask questions about like how did that make you feel, and kind of like get like used to discussing it, but not just like how did that make you feel, but more like pointed questions about just like what did you relate to, like what does that kind of bring up for you, like what was your childhood like, and kind of figuring out how to create more of a like regular discussion around it, so it's not just like once in a while, but more of a like something that they are used to talking about. And
that's almost like what you're saying that you're trying to do in like making those jokes and stuff, is like bring the topic to the fore more frequently, because I think it is true that like white people will gladly just kind of ignore it, or maybe they're not actually ignoring it, but they're not trying to start the conversation. So, and then I guess a follow up to that is like, it seems like that could be, there's a lot of room for error in trying to do that, like you know, the fear of like asking a question that will come across as ignorant or offensive or something like that. And maybe that gets to your question, Sarah, about
so in asking, like in that fear of like not knowing how to like ask the question and just kind of like not asking it in general is just gonna like not help anybody, right? Because like it's better to just ask that question. Like there are some people who are going to be like, I don't want to do that labor for you. But there's, I think on Facebook, a group called like Free Emotional Labor Club, where you can just ask for that kind of support, and people will just like give that to you. But also like for me, I'm happy to answer pretty much most questions, regardless of like how weird or like dumb they are. Cause like I always love doing that. Even when it's like something that people aren't sure about. And I've had people like friends ask me about like what I feel about other Black people or like certain Black things. And like, we're not a monolith, but like, I feel like I'm pretty good about answering those questions and, you know, helping people understand. So if you can figure out a way to like ask the question, even if it's like uncomfortable for you, it's still better to do that. 'Cause like that discomfort helps create more comfort.
Right. And I think about one of my love languages is curiosity. Like people wanting to know about me, and me like expressing that kind of curiosity back is like, that's how I fall in love with people. And I think that always takes a lot of vulnerability and risk and fucking up. Like getting close to people, being intimate with people includes fucking up. And like being seen and seeing others includes fucking up.
It does.
And I think like for there to be an entire area in a romantic or a loving sexual intimate relationship where you're like, well, but I don't risk fucking up there, is actually just a way of not showing up and not being loving, and not taking risks for people.
Especially I think that's something that is also challenging in like the relationships I've been in those like arguments, because like I tend to not be like, if you're going to argue with me, I would still talk like this. In a board game, I'd be like, yo, dude, fuck you. I don't even know what you're fucking talking about, man. I got that. So like, it's different because I don't want to come across like aggressive or change the tone. And I'm aware that like, you know, people kind of bounce off the energy that you're giving. So I always try to keep it chill. I
hear how much you're always thinking about that, about being too angry or aggressive or intimidating in some way.
So I've had to help like tell my partners or people that I'm dating that like you can't refer to me as like aggressive even in like a joking manner because it's like even people are just like flippantly like, oh, he's being so aggressive, like you're so aggressive, even if I just like am playfully doing something. It's just like that term is still kind of like creating this like mindset and perpetuating like, you know, just being called aggressive even if I'm not necessarily being aggressive.
It sounds threatening. It's like potentially life threatening.
And so like figuring out in those moments of like conflict how to both respect everybody involved is essential. Like I had one of my exes during like a big fight. She was like throwing things and like, you know, screaming at me, the whole thing. But that was like really challenging because we're in an apartment. And so if somebody like called the police, you know, like that would have been dangerous for her. And it wasn't like I was doing it.
She white?
No, she was Mexican.
Okay.
But she still was like putting both of our lives in danger by like just, you know, being really drunk. And I mean, part of it was she was drunk and I had taken away her keys because I didn't want her to drive. And so like making sure that we're in spaces where even if there is conflict, doing it in a way to like resolve it without creating more conflict is really essential. And so like asking questions as well as just like creating a spot where you can just be like heard and vulnerable.
And it also sounds like being aware of the complexity of danger and threat. Like that there are situations and like understanding the context of those situations where a Black partner, a BIPOC partner is in danger potentially. And like as white people, we have to understand that and be navigating it and not just expect BIPOC partners to do it alone.
It's also something that I also am always aware of is like if like I wouldn't usually ever get like violent because I don't know who else someone else knows and like what little excuse they need to just go do something to someone. And like whether they're in a gang or not, I don't think a lot of people need that much of an excuse to be violent. And so I try not to give them that excuse. And I know even as like, I know it's such a weird fact, but like from 2012 to like 2013 to like 2016, I got like slapped by a white woman every year. It always happened at least like once.
From 2012 to 2016?
Yeah, at least I know in like for a good period of time, I'd always gotten slapped by a white woman. And I was just like, it at least happens once a year. And it's not because I'm doing anything in particular. I'm extremely sassy and I always use my words and like I'm going to be teasing, but the way that people react to me because of like my size is usually physical.
Right.
So like I had a coworker who like I'd put my hand in the window and she was like trying to close it. And so like my hand was blocking it. And so she got frustrated and just like slapped me in the face.
I see.
I had like a partner who I was dating at the time and we were like joking around and she slapped me. I don't remember like what we were doing, but it was just like in a like play fight. It didn't feel, I don't remember what we were doing, but like it was enough that I was like, oh yeah. And then I had a coworker who I was like joking because she was throwing the folders and I was like, careful, that black folder is my cousin. And she was like annoying, like smacked me with the folder. And so like I haven't had it happen as much recently, but like it was something that I was always just like aware that like because of how big I am, even if I just like add myself to that situation, people might react like physically just because of that. And so I'm always trying to like not necessarily just jump into things. So like there'll be situations where people are like, they might need support. And I'm even at like work, and I don't always like add myself to that dynamic because I don't necessarily know if that's going to escalate things.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a lot to be thinking about. And also, one of the things that I hear in that is just that people can physically hurt you and not think that you're experiencing it as physical pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
what about this sort of question of like repair, I guess, around a like, you know, less intense, like a, you know, something, a transgression with a partner, or like a white partner that just like kind of fucks something up, like not in a big way, but like
Fuck something up specific around race.
Yeah, specifically around race. Like, how do you think about that? Or like, what do you think about as like the tools for a person who's been like, oh, I, you know, hurt Ramsey and something that ignorant that I said around race.
I would say that like the most important thing is to like apologize, you know, and let them know like, hey, I'm sorry that I did that. And then just like educate yourself on like how to be better and not do that again. Because a lot of times it's not always like about the hurt, it's about how you learn. Because like if it keeps repeating itself, that's the issue, and like we're all going to get hurt in some way. But it really matters about like what you do when that person gets hurt.
And who you center in the repair.
Who you center, yeah.
And how you can show care. That isn't just about you feeling fragile or embarrassed or ashamed.
Yeah.
And I think like that white people, that is well-meaning white people, that is one of our biggest issues. We've got a lot of big issues, but that's one of them, is just like the low tolerance for getting something wrong. And that just being like our sort of shame, our guilt, our embarrassment, or just like not liking feeling bad at something that then actually gets in the way of learning or centering who was hurt or being close to people.
Yeah. Because especially like it's hard when something happens to someone else and then the other people are upset because they're like, I'm so sad, that could have been me. And I was like, okay, but like you are okay. You don't have to like do that. And it says like when they center someone else, it helps them feel like held. But when you're centering yourself in that like apology and being like, I'm sorry that I didn't understand that, because it's like, well, we know you wouldn't understand. But
you want to hear about, I'm sorry, about how it impacted you.
How it impacted, but also like kind of figuring out how you can just like be better and make more of an impact in other ways. So like that's why I really think it's important to just be in other, like consume a lot of Black media, because then you'll see how when Black people hurt each other and like how they kind of like repair the harm between each other. Because like what do you do when you don't have that excuse? You know?
Interesting. Also, I think like from a tools perspective, there's a little bit of affinity grouping to happen there for white people. It's like, you fucked up, you're ashamed, you're embarrassed, you caused harm. You're going to have feelings about that, but those feelings should go to other white people.
Yeah.
And that's like part of being in community with like anti-racist white people too, as part of the work.
Yeah. But you also like, it's a tight balance, right? Because you want to talk to other white people about race, but you don't want to discuss things that affect other races without other races there. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like, that might be for episode 2, but that tension is so real, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, not to like flatten or compare gender and race here, but it's definitely something that I think about a lot with men. Yeah. And it's like, oh my God, do I want men to be talking to each other about their experiences with women and their impacts on women? And also I'm like, what's happening there? You know?
Right. Yeah, we were talking about this exact thing after that party. Yeah.
Can we do an audit at some point?
So like the transcript, put the transcripts into AI and get an assessment. Yeah.
It's so like, it's very easy when you're discussing things to kind of lose sight of the people that you're discussing.
Right.
And I think the best way to understand something is just to interact with it. So I really recommend just consuming a lot of, Black media. One of my favorite shows is Atlanta.
Oh, okay.
And that one just has lots of different, it's a very weird show, but I like it because it's just like, it it shows how weird Black people are. And they're very weird.
Right. It's countering like a monolithic presentation.
Very much so.
Yeah. And it seems like it deals with race.
All right. Put out some other recommendations now that we're in that space.
Let's see. Atlanta Insecure is a good one. I like a million little things. That show devastated me. I just finished it. It does talk about race, but kind of like later. It kind of talks more about like mental health and suicide.
Okay. Yeah.
What else? I watch so many shows and movies that it's like I'm just always kind of like consuming media. Moonlight's one of my favorite movies. That's a really good one that I recommend. Especially since today is like MLK Day, I'd recommend watching like MLK and Me. That's like a good kids movie. I'd recommend watching the Boondocks. I don't know how, like, you can watch it first and then kind of determine like what episodes.
For kids. Yeah,
it's not for kids.
Oh, okay.
He calls them nigglets.
Nope.
But here's the thing, right? Like, it's uncomfortable, but you can have those conversations because, like, where else would you get those situations to hear that?
Right.
And like Aaron Magruder, I met him. He's a great guy. He kind of helps like reframe a lot of those things within like the Black experience. So like there's some episodes that might not be for kids, but like I watched it with my mom and then I watched it a lot more growing up. But I'd recommend, looking into like Black TV shows that are created by like Black authors. There's one, Octavia Butler. She made one. There's like Kindred. It's on Hulu.
Yes.
That was a good one, but that got canceled.
Yep.
This Is Us is okay. I have like mixed feelings about it, but the first season's really good, and it talks about like kind of like losing a close older like family member.
Ramsey, this is a great list. Thank you.
Can I ask one more closing?
You can ask whatever you want.
Okay. It sounds like maybe we'll get to talk more, so that's good because there's a lot to talk about.
Before you do that, like just on a toolkit, I feel like also what you mentioned, the Free Emotional Labor Facebook group, just from a resources like toolkit perspective, since we were kind of like in that space, that sounds like a good one. Yes?
It's a great one.
Okay.
So that one is a really good group to be in because you can just ask questions without like kind of feeling like you're going to be judged. And then if you do have questions, you can kind of scroll down and see where other people have like answered. And you'll get a plethora of, information on there where people are like just happy to answer those questions. So it's a great spot to ask those questions.
Thanks.
My question was going to be like, what do you like about dating people of other races?
Just kidding. Are you trying to get me canceled? No. I like.
Be specific.
What it specifically?
I'm not necessarily saying like about the like,
races
attributes of the people, but the dynamic.
The dynamic.
I guess, like we've been talking about this whole thing, like a lot of the pitfalls, and like clearly it's still a thing that like it sounds like a thing that you think that you like to do, and you think that people should do.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to hear a little bit about that.
I just love meeting people and interacting with people and hearing different perspectives and ideas and just getting to know them. And so like I'm always happy to kind of like have those experiences, and that's why I like asking those like uncomfortable questions. I tend not to do that on dates because I feel like it can be kind of weird, especially if I ask that, but like depending on the people, right? But like I really enjoy how kind of like it opens up your perspective and helps you kind of you can grow yourself more in learning about others because it helps you learn more about yourself. And I think that's the fun part about dating people that are different from you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just thinking about like the quote that actually has been attributed and misattributed a million times, that the personal is political and the political is personal. And I feel like, where is that not more true than in our relationships, like our intimate relationships with each other? It's like we get to have all of that complexity there, and it's intense, but
yeah.
unavoidable and also rewarding.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Ramsey, for coming on the podcast. And hopefully we can have you back again because we didn't actually talk about polyamory like at all.
But we talked about polyamory.
A little bit.
But here's the thing, right? Is like, I think we get lost in talking about polyamory when we just only discuss polyamory. But when you discuss everything as a whole, you get a lot more education and you're a lot more capable, because if you're talking about polyamory with race, you need to talk about race in the world.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Thanks, Ramsey. Thanks for coming and talking to us today. I really appreciate it. Already looking forward to the next one.
Too.
Right.
And thank you for listening to Mistakes Were Made. We'll be back in 3 weeks with another episode. In the meantime, please subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice and follow us on Instagram at MistakesCast.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.